1990.
It was the beginning of a brand new decade. The 80s had come and gone with all their amazing contributions to pop culture, and now was the final decade of the 20th century. The year which arguably had the best forms of entertainment, which left a lasting legacy that is still felt today in the 2020s, over 30 years later. It is the decade that will forever be in my heart, and a number of my favourite things in entertainment came out in this decade. So today, I will be highlighting some of my standouts and personal faves from the year 1990. So, let's get started. Beginning with the movies. The list of movies that came out this year read like a movie hall of fame with so many classics coming out this year. As we are fresh from celebrating the Christmas season, it's only fitting that I start with two movies widely considered Christmas movies, but for very differing reasons. The first one being Home Alone. A movie about a young boy, Kevin McAllister, who is left stranded at home whilst his family are on vacation in Paris. Or rather, he was forgotten by accident and he's left home alone. Kevin embraces this and then he runs amok. He also has to protect the house from a couple of burglars known as the Wet Bandits, Marv and Harry. With plenty of slapstick humour and hijinks, Home Alone is a funny, light-hearted movie which shot Macaulay Culkin into superstardom in the 90s. Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern, Catherine O'Hara and John Candy all feature in this classic comedy. Changing the tone, and the second Christmas movie, if you will, was the action thriller Die Hard 2 with Bruce Willis returning as Detective John McClane. Last time it was the Nakatomi Plaza from the terrorists, this time it's saving Dulles International Airport from a disgraced former military colonel and his band of ex-military men who are plotting to rescue a corrupt foreign military leader. McClane faces the battle on two fronts, having to convince the LAPD and airport traffic control of the terrorist plot, and just as he did in the first movie, go at it on his lonesome against the terrorists. Bullets, explosions, fight scenes, cuss words galore, your standard recipe for a Die Hard movie with Bruce Willis. From one 90s action star to another, Arnold Schwarzenegger starred in the sci-fi action flick Total Recall. The movie is set in the year 2084, and Mars is under the rule of Vilas Cohagen. Arnie plays a construction worker, Douglas Quaid, who repeatedly has dreams about Mars and a mysterious woman. He discovers a company known as Recall that implants false memories on its subjects, of which he is taken and implanted with a memory, believing that he is a Martian secret agent. With the help of the mysterious woman known as Melina, he fights to free Mars from Cohagen's tyrannical rule and free himself from his dream. From action to comedy, Schwarzenegger also starred in the comedy flick Kindergarten Cop. He plays a cop who goes undercover as a kindergarten teacher to try and apprehend a drug dealer, and whilst undercover, after a frantic and hilarious start, he begins to warm to the idea of being a teacher for real, which he ends up doing after the events of the film. Between Total Recall and Kindergarten Cop, Schwarzenegger commanded over $460 million at the box office, making him one of the most bankable stars of the 90s. Next we had Julia Roberts and Richard Gere starring the romantic comedy Pretty Woman. Gere plays a high-powered corporate raider from New York, and he just happens to encounter Roberts, who plays a free-spirited prostitute named Vivian. With what starts as a standard escort service slowly develops into a full-blown romance. It has a lot of charm and a lot of wit, and it is the movie that shot Julia Roberts into superstardom. Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte returned in the sequel to 1982's 48 Hours with another 48 Hours. A buddy cop movie with cop Jack Cates needing the help of newly released convict Reggie Hammond to clear his name from a charge of manslaughter. And whilst Reggie has his own problems as he is the target of a biker gang hired by a mastermind known only as Iceman. Cars, guns, action, and that signature Eddie Murphy wit made this a very fun watch. Not one of his greatest hits, but still a very entertaining movie. Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox teamed up for a third time in Back to the Future 3, the third and final installment in this series. In 1955, moments after seeing Doc disappear in the DeLorean, Marty McFly learns that Doc was sent to 1885. Using that information from Doc's 1885 letter, Marty and the 1955 version of Doc find and repair the DeLorean so Marty can return to 1985. However, Marty comes across a tombstone with Doc's name on it, with the inscription stating that Doc was shot by Biff Tannen's great-grandfather, Buford Mad Dog Tannen. Marty decides to go back and save Doc despite the tomb's warning. A lot of sci-fi time-traveling shenanigans galore in this movie involves the third and final installment of the Back to the Future series.
Sorry, Jack. Chucky's back.
1990 saw the resurrection of the infamous killer doll Chucky in Child's Play 2. Chucky is resurrected and relentlessly continues his pursuit of young Andy, looking to transfer his soul into him so he may live as a human. Andy is sent to a foster family to live with her as she has been institutionalized from the events of the first film. Unfortunately, Andy's new family fall victim to Chucky's actions. With the help of street-smart kid Kyle, played by actress Christine Ellis of Beverly Hills 90210 fame, he fights to stay alive before Chucky can end him permanently. A very cliched late 80s, early 90s style slasher with a lot of suspense and a bit of gore. Jean-Claude Van Damme stakes his claim as one of the biggest action stars of the 90s in this action prison thriller Deathborn. He stars as police detective Louis Burke, who is going into a prison facility in California as an undercover cop in order to find out who was behind the mysterious series of murders, and he finds himself locked up with his nemesis, Christian Naylor, a psychotic serial killer who calls himself the Sandman, who sets out to get revenge on him after getting him into prison in the first place. The usual Jean-Claude Van Damme movie trades: kicks, guns, action, and more action. It's one of the more better acted J.C. Reilly movies, but this wasn't his only outing this year. Van Damme also starred in the action drama flick AWOL, or Lionheart as it was known in some different countries. Van Damme stars as a French foreign legionnaire who has entered an underground fighting circuit in Los Angeles as he attempts to raise money for his dead brother's family. This was the first Van Damme movie I ever watched, and whilst not my favourite, I think it's one of his better performances in terms of character portrayal. Famed director Tim Burton directed this fantasy romantic movie, Edward Scissorhands, starring Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder, an unfinished artificial android who has scissor blades for hands and is taken in by a suburban family and falls in love with their teenage daughter. 1990 also saw the release of one of the greatest gangster movies of all time, Goodfellas, starring Joe Pesci. This was his second big outing alongside Home Alone, the late great Ray Liotta, and screen legend Robert De Niro. The film tells the story of the rise and fall of mob associate Henry Hill and his friends and family from 1955 through to 1980. Henry starts as a small-time crook to big-time gangster and then later an informant for the police. Henry becomes fascinated with the mobster lifestyle and aligns himself with Jimmy the Gent Conboy and Tommy DeVito, starting from small-time to more high-profile serious crimes. There is just no understating what a big cultural impact this movie brought to the world of film. It was based on the 1984 book Wise Guy, which was written by crime reporter Nicholas Pileggi. Lethal Weapon star Danny Glover stars in Predator 2, the sequel to the Schwarzenegger original. The film is set 10 years after the first Predator movie, and Glover plays a disgruntled cop who is investigating a war between rival drug cartels and whilst also trying to stay alive against the Predator, who is on a hunting spree, and with Glover looking to get revenge for a murdered colleague. The reviews for this movie were mostly negative on several movie sites, and given the lack of Arnold Schwarzenegger, it was always going to be a tough act to follow. Danny Glover did get praised for his performances in the movie, and overall, I think it's a pretty decent watch. RoboCop 2 came shooting its way onto cinema screens this year. Set in the dystopian Detroit, Michigan, the film follows RoboCop as he has become embroiled in a scheme made by Omni Consumer Products to bankrupt and take over the city, whilst also fighting the spread of a street drug and its gang of dealers led by the villainous Kane. Kane ends up wounded in a fight against RoboCop and ends up having his brain implanted in a heavily armed robotic body. And there is a fight to the finish between the two machines. The film received mixed reviews, with the common complaint being the character development of RoboCop was buried under a sea of violence. If you want character growth, well, this movie wasn't it. If you wanted action, violence, and more action, RoboCop 2 was the one. Switching gears, and 1990 saw the release of comedy flick Three Men and a Little Lady, starring Tom Selleck, Ted Danson, and Steve Guttenberg. This was the sequel to 1987's Three Men and a Baby. Baby Mary is now 5 years old and she lives with the three lads and her mother Sylvia. Peter, played by Tom Selleck, falls in love with Sylvia, who also feels the same, but Peter, being a guy, doesn't reciprocate and express his feelings. Sylvia wants a lot more, and she decides to accept the proposal of a director named Edward, and Edward is not enamored with young Mary, and also plans to move to England. Peter has to pluck up the courage to reveal his feelings, whilst exposing Edward as a phony. Whilst not as good as the first movie, the film is a decent sequel with a lot of charm, a lot of humour, and a lot of wit. Next, we move on to the urban legend of a movie that has set the blueprint for party movies, the one and only House Party, starring 90s hip-hop duo Kid and Play. Play announces that he is having a party at his place and everybody is invited, especially the ladies. Kid gets into a fight with the school bullies and ends up grounded by his pops. From there, it's shenanigans galore as Kid sneaks off to the party but has to endure all kinds of obstacles, including the bullies, jail, and racist cops, and get back home before his pops wake up. It's a movie jam-packed with all manner of hilarity, dancing, rapping, pretty girls galore. A movie that is going to become a cult classic and inspired several sequels, including an up-and-coming 2023 remake. Finally ending the movie run of 1990 was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, my first ever foray into the world of the Ninja Turtles. It was a gritty, dark, and semi-violent take on the characters when compared to the animated show of the 80s. This was loosely based on the 80s comic from Mirage Studios. A group of 4 humanoid turtles live on the streets of New York with their sensei Master Splinter after being transformed by a mysterious glowing ooze. The city of New York is under siege by a host of robberies perpetrated by a gang of ninja thieves known as the Foot Clan, led up by their leader, the Shredder. Reporter April O'Neil is in the line of fire as she reports on their operations, seeking to bring them to justice. The turtles come to her rescue and Splinter tells her of their history. Splinter is later kidnapped and the turtles turn to April to help find him. In battle against the Foot Clan, the turtles are helped by vigilante Casey Jones. A final battle sees the turtles go up against the Foot and the Shredder. Splinter is eventually rescued and comes face to face with the Shredder. The success of this movie cannot be understated. It was an independent movie that did well in the box office and helped catapult the popularity of the Ninja Turtles into superstardom. Over 30 years on, and it's still widely considered the absolute best Ninja Turtles movie of all time. And that was some of the highlights from the year 1990, the beginning of the final decade of the 20th century. This was only the start of what will become one of the most memorable times in TV entertainment. I'm K-Man of Smugface Entertainment. Thank you for watching along, and remember,